simultaneous interpretation from the Russian by John Glad. The program is entitled News 1. Good evening. Our programs and problems are increasing along with the prices in Moldova, and the prices have been freed up as in Russia. Today, all the troops stationed in the Ukraine, aside from the strategic nuclear forces, will be subordinated to the President of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. Marshal Shapashnikov will continue his trip along his itinerary within the Commonwealth of Independent States in Georgia. In Georgia, the opposition is forming an independent government. President Bush has arrived in Singapore. New facts about the Amber Room. The disintegration of the Union has raised the question of the fate of the armed forces. In Minsk, the agreement was reached that each state had the right to create its own armed forces. Today, Ukraine declared that all troops stationed on its territory, with the exception of nuclear forces, would be subordinated directly to the President of Ukraine and the Ministry of Defense. From the 3rd of January, the process of creating an independent force structure has begun. Here we see draftees about to take the oath. They have been called up from the territory of Ukraine and will be serving here. The oath of the officers is set up for the 18th and 19th of January, but many officers, before swearing in oath, hope to receive from the Ukrainian government a guarantee as to a social safety net. There is also a concern among the officers that there may be a violation here of an old tradition, according to which nowhere and at no time did an officer have to swear an oath twice. Does this not contradict the oath? This is Mr. Bariskin, who is the head of the Kiev military region. We have sworn an oath to the Soviet people, which included the Ukrainian people. We are ready to defend Ukraine and those states which have now entered into the Commonwealth. In Minsk, there was not resolved the question as to the united forces of the Commonwealth. Will there be such a force, and who will finance it? Where will they be stationed? For the time being, the troops have only the letters SA on their shoulders, which means Soviet Army. The problems of the various leaders of the Commonwealth have had childish problems compared to the army problems. Their agreement, which they signed with regard to the army and border troops, this statement is declarative and explanatory in nature. One gets the impression that they are perhaps dividing up a factory and not a large army of men under arms. Does there still exist the Ministry of Defense of the Soviet Union? It's difficult to say. But here we see the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense working, basically on work, and if there is a swearing of the oath to the Ukraine, that might lead to a mass exodus of officers. At the current time, 40.3% of the military personnel are Ukrainian, 44.5% are Russian, and 15 are others. There might be a breakup of military units and a loss of control over the arsenal. In the Caucasus today, people are being killed with Soviet weaponry. And if there are going to be new events, that doesn't mean this weaponry will become less in quantity. Where will the units go? They have been stationed in the Baltic. Marshal Shapashnikov is now conducting a tour and is visiting those states which wish to establish their own forces. Moldova has refused to finance and was Uzbekistan and Transcaucasian Republic are creating their own military units. Will Belarus buy diesel fuel for tanks at world prices? How about the Moldavians? What are they going to do? So there's not much left of the former military might of the Soviet Union. There's more questions here than answers. But we have an army here of 3.5 million men, and so we have to be very cautious here. According to TASS, the Independent Union of Military Personnel has stated that the creation of Republican armies, without taking into account the national belonging of the various soldiers, is a violation of human rights, and people are being forced to sign an oath only to the specific republic in which they are serving. And the organizing committee has asked for assistance from Europe in this regard in resolving this question. The events in Tbilisi in Georgia are taking on a dramatic character. At 2 p.m., Gamsakhourdi received an ultimatum. By 6 p.m., they had to leave the building, otherwise the building would be stormed. A correspondent of Moscow News said that Gamsakhourdi had 500 armed men left. In principle, he's totally surrounded. He had an address to the people, asking them to engage in civil disobedience. 10 persons in masks opened fire on the crowd who were supporting Gamsakhourdi. First, they shot into the air and then opened fire directly on the crowd, and at least one person was killed. At 5 p.m., from the press center of the President of Georgia, there was received a declaration from Gamsakhourdi. He called upon the people to support the legally elected government. At 5:15 p.m., the shooting died down somewhat because the leaders of the opposition were meeting at that time. At 6 p.m., the military council of opposition took upon itself the entire burden of authority. Today in Moscow, there arrived the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Georgia, Mr. Amanidze. He was he was stationed previously in the government center. He came to meet with the Russian leaders. He wants to put an end to the civil war taking place in Georgia. In southern Ossetia, there's a temporary truce because part of the troops which have been serving Gamsakhourdi have been shifted to Tbilisi. However, in Utskhinval and Znauria, there's shooting still going on. We have here an emergency situation. Vladikavkaz is being blockaded, and it's very cold in the city right now. The profession of a journalist is one of the most dangerous professions. 86 journalists have lost their lives just on the eve of the new year. Leonid Lazarevich, our colleague, lost his life. So we want to go to these bloody places which inspire so much anxiety and go together with our regular correspondents and Mr. Pavlov. We want to go there and visit all these very painful spots. We are going to tell only that which we see and not more than what we see with our own eyes. Those were the last words from the last report of Leonid Lazarevich, which were sent to Mayak. This is Mr. Pavlov, who is a radio journalist, who's with him. He says the situation was very complex. You couldn't raise your head even. There was automatic fire, weapons fire, and machine guns. There was it was a spot, area which was being shot up regularly. I shouted to Leonid. He was third in line. Leonid bent down. They're shooting. He was together with me, just 2 meters away. He was just 2 meters away from being saved. Leonid was a professional. And in any situation, He based his actions on the desire to see himself, to get a feeling for the situation himself, and only then did he consider that he had the full right to tell about anything to his radio listeners. The truth, and only the truth. So that was Leonid Lazarevich, who had 8-9 reports on space topics from Baikonur and Sup, for which he received a medal. He said these two peoples could not continue living this way, that they should stop this senseless war, and that those words cost him his life. Leonid Lazarevich was buried in Vagankovsky cemetery in his hometown. We all are colleagues of his, and we all studied under him. We